You are listening to the Get Global podcast, a weekly journey into the international business landscape with leaders, knowers, and doers from around the world who share their stories and insights on the issues that matter most. Get Global brings you the best to help you thrive in foreign markets. Welcome to the Get Global podcast. This is Julian Luthold, founder and CEO of Get Global. And we have with us this week Gabriel Zalzman, who is currently an advisor with Mattel, but until a few months ago was the executive vice president of international at the company. And he's been with Mattel since 2000, occupying numerous roles in various geographies and functions. I'm going to let him say a little bit more about that himself, but he has also been in the foods industry with Nabisco and Kraft. And thank you for joining us today, Gabriel.
Thank you, Julian. Happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from and how you got into all of this.
I'll take a shorter route, but I was born in Paris from Colombian parents. I spent my first 10 years of life in 5 different countries. We became Venezuelans by choice when I was 16. Industrial engineering came afterwards. I did an MBA also in Caracas. My career took me through different functions in different places in Nabisco. I was general manager in Nabisco Colombia. And then Mattel knocked the door and I changed, starting by managing the Venezuelan business. Then I managed the Andean business. I moved to Mexico City. I also managed the Mattel business there for almost 4 to 5 years. Then I moved to New York and managed the Fisher-Price Friends business, which was not only a change of geography, but also a change in functionality. From having more of marketing, sales, logistics, I moved to working with design, engineering, and marketing, and managing the relationship with Nick, Disney, and other IP suppliers. Then I moved to, I managed Latin America without Mexico. Then I moved to Barcelona after New York. I moved to Barcelona where I ran all of Europe for Mattel. And about 4 years ago, I moved to headquarters here in LA. I worked there. I had a great opportunity to work on developing global capabilities around digital and insights. And also the last couple of years, I worked as chief commercial officer for international, graduated from Mattel. And after 20 years, so it's been a good ride.
That is a lot. So you've seen a lot, you've done a lot, all the way from early days in Venezuela to global digital and the rest. You didn't mention Asia, but I know that you've got a little bit of experience there. I guess that's a part of the globe that we get a lot of at Get Global by virtue of our place on the Pacific. Have you've spent some time working on Asian issues too, right?
Yes. Well, my last position as Chief Commercial Officer of International had responsibility over Asia and all of emerging markets. And with the people there, we developed an accelerated growth plan for China. So most of my tenure as Chief Commercial Officer was spent with the Asian team developing strategies. Not only in China, which was a huge part of the strategy, but also in other parts of Southeast Asia and India. So I do have experience in those markets.
So what would you say about kids around the world? How similar are they? How different are they? What have you learned in your time at Mattel about kids?
Yeah, this is one of those big revelations, and being at the toy industry and working with kids, you see that they tend to react very similar to the play experience. The play experience is a global experience, and a kid grabs a toy, presses a button, a light comes up, a sound happens, and you see that smile coming out. And that's something that happens in India, in China, in France, in Mexico, across the globe. So if you talk about who's playing with the toy, have very similar reactions around the world. What starts to become different is that gatekeeper, which are the parents. They bring along all of their cultural and particular understandings on how play relates to the kid's development or the kid's entertainment. So that's where you start to customize the strategy for each one of the regions or for each one of the locations. But you are truly speaking about a global category that that then has more commonalities in product and in marketing. And also content travels well in most of the time. Kids content, I mean. So those are elements that really talk about how those commonalities work.
So who do you consider your customer? Is it the parent or the kid, the children?
Yeah. Well, it depends a bit on the brand. And there's some certain moment where the kid becomes more independent of their choices and on their resources. But earlier on, a brand like Fisher-Price, which is a leading preschool and infant brand, the person you talk and engage is the parent. From the moment they learn that their baby's coming, all the way through 18, 24 months, that's a period where we talk straight and directly to the parents. In the case of when the kids are starting to get older, they make their own choices. And they force more the hand of the parents asking for specific toys or brands. And that's where brands like Hot Wheels or Barbie then become extremely relevant, and we talk and engage more directly with the kid.
So when I think of the season that we're about to get into, which is the holiday season, right? There's always this desire to become the hottest toy, right? You want to have that thing that every parent has to go and get their kid. What is that like here versus in other countries? Is that a phenomenon that you see in other places, or that you tried to catalyze if it wasn't there? So maybe like Singles Day now or something like that in China, or in other places like in India, maybe there's Diwali. What's the phenomenon like of, having the hottest item when that time of year comes, and developing that sort of sense of scarcity, or you've got to make sure that you're the one that gets it?
Yes, and those two differences that you just mentioned are very, very key and very clear. In the case of Europe, Latin America, the US, obviously you have that moment of gift opening that it's very crucial for the toy industry. And be that on Hanukkah or Christmas, that period, or Three Kings Day that you have in Mexico and Spain, those are key moments where kids are expecting to get that gift. So there's a lot of power from on the kids' side of asking what they want to their parents. In places where that urgency is not as big, like the festivals in India, it's becoming bigger and bigger, but it's not a tradition to give out toys. So the gatekeeper still has a lot of power on making the choice for the kids during that period. Obviously, for us and our marketing, gearing to that moment where a kid opens a gift and sees what they asked for becomes extremely powerful. And that's a moment that we rejoice on. And when we're working on the field, that's something that we're always thinking about, that smile in a kid's face. But it's different from place to place, giving the cultural elements Of course, we're working with retail partners and understanding better each one of the cultures to see how can you celebrate that moment in a kid's life with a toy, because we know it's something that the play value just brings not only joy but a lot of learning and capability development for the kids. So that's in part the purpose, but it's a great cultural difference between several parts of the world.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago a couple of things that caught my ear. It was Barbie and insights and digital and a few things. So what have you seen in the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years that has affected the feedback that you get from the market and the insights that you collect that is changing the way that you think of toys, right? So Barbie, for instance, has gone through some interesting changes. What is it that you observe through those processes that you've worked with and set up in some cases, and how does that process work? That of changing a toy and its identity and how you think about it.
Well, 5 to 10 years has been a century for the toy industry. It has been some substantial change around the industry. And let me start by mentioning content as the biggest one. I believe that content has been modified dramatically, specifically when it was one of the core competencies that you would gain in the toy industry was developing TV spots that would, engage kids and drive product sales. It was very clear, the relationship, and that content has taken new ways and forms. In the case of Barbie, I do believe that the vision has been there for many years. The vision of just empowering girls to be what they want to be. That has been a driver that was there from the inception on of the brand. And if you talk with the Barbie team, you will find passionate people about this. I do believe that new media and new content forms has been able to provide a more direct way of telling the message and owning the message of what we stand for, what Barbie stands for. And that has helped craft the brand. I believe that Barbie has also talked straight about what they believe in terms of some of the critiques that it used to receive. It has worked on having different bodies, and all of those elements have been just what the brand really stands for, and to take away some of the criticism that some people use for their own purposes. And it's understandable. Barbie, it's a mega brand. It's a huge brand. But we believe in that vision, and I think that's what you find in the Barbie team.
So when you think in that, from that point of view of reflecting what women want to be and empowering them what they want to be what they want to be, how do you find out what they want to be?
Oh, we have, and we're talking to girls, and we have play labs and people coming to our design center, research, straight communication with kids every day. We're letting them play, we're letting them engage, we're letting them have conversations, and we're understanding what they want and how they want to play. That is crucial, and that's where we serve these worlds that come out of their own imagination, and we try to serve that purpose of just giving them tools to play out what they want to become, and really feel empowered to play out that fantasy of what they want to become. So we have a lot of research. We talk to girls, we talk to parents, and that's a constant that happens every day. And I think that's one of the strengths of the company.
And do you do that worldwide? So in territories like the Middle East, for instance, would that process be the same there?
We don't have a specific play labs, but we do global research, and the global research goes across several regions and geographies.
So what would you say is what would you say are some of the biggest determinants of strategy right now? How do you think the company, while you've been at it, and particularly in the last few years, maybe last 2 or 3, what has gone into the way that the company thinks? And even maybe just from your perspective, how do you think about the world, how it's changing, how that affects strategy, and how leaders ought to be thinking right now?
Let me bring back the commentary about how the last 5 to 10 years have been centuries in the toy industry, because I think some of the basic fundamentals of the industry have shifted. In the case of, like we said, content, Ruth Handler, when she started the company, she placed a big bet on Saturday morning cartoons. And that just created TV advertising for Saturday morning cartoons. And that just created a dynamic that was so strong and powerful that was a clear competency for some of the companies in the toy industry. TV still a very important medium, but now we have moved from TV spots, which I can tell you some of the toy industry companies are machines at producing this, have moved to very different types of content, and even unboxing videos and user-generated content. So that variance on the type of content that has been developed has been one of the crucial elements of change for the industry. And the relationship on how to place that content. It's not the creation and the different formats that you need to develop, but also how it gets placed has changed dramatically. Now, the other piece that I believe has done a lot of change is retail. You have that the toy industry was an industry that specialized in managing seasonal product for a limited shelf space, for just thinking about the turns on shelf and how to manage those small periods of sales to consumers. So that was a competency that was very strong for several years. And you have moved from limited shelf space to infinite shelf space at the retail landscape, where how you produce and create engagement and the rotation is very different from the past. Those two elements have brought barriers of entry down, and you have different competition coming in, and being the smaller companies have been able to gain traction and penetration, and the cost of introduction have gone down. So the strategic environment has changed substantially for the toy industry. And I think the factors of content and consumer engagement, retail, and then internal competition and external competitors coming into the marketplace has really created a new set of challenges and opportunities for the industry.
So one thing that we've seen with the media industry is that, companies like the New York Times and others, even including like BuzzFeed, they expand internationally and they run up against local competition, and it proves to be a lot stiffer than they thought. How do you think about the local competitors? What kind of strengths do they have, and how do you carve out your positioning and go about thinking through that process of taking the fight right back to them?
I think no competitor is small in this day and age. And if you think about content, especially in the kids arena, tends to have a global resonance. So global content works well. But there's still some local players that create some incredible content that can be very powerful for the local consumer. So we always are looking at what type of local development in terms of content exists. And I don't think that you have any small competitor in this day and age. You must know that some of these wins that happen at local can become global very, very quickly. That's the kind of dynamic that you have, and especially when barriers of entry are going down. You might expect people just coming into your marketplace. So we have people on the ground. Most of the large toy companies have subsidiaries around the world, which are monitoring competition, engaging local consumers, and managing local retail. And that provides a source of input for the global teams to understand what's coming their way, what opportunities, and what's changing on the consumer landscape, and how to address those. I think that's a network that really builds into the global set of a larger toy company.
Do you feel like the local competitors, the competition has become more difficult?
It depends on which regions of the world. There's clearly in China, there's some large local competitors. You have some European-based competitors that are extremely strong. So it depends on each one of the regions. I tend to measure relative market share as a source of internal, competition in an industry. In some cases, it's a very tight race. You're one and a half point away from each other. So that's tight and really strong competition. In some other parts of the world, there's larger differences between one competitor or the other, like in Latin America. So it depends on what part of the world. You have different levels of competitors. And as I said, you can see one local phenomenon become global very, very quickly. And some local companies, if they're in a large enough market, then they can have more of a global ambition and drive their local successes to that global arena. And that's what we're also very wary of, and understanding how that plays out on the long run.
What do you think it's done to the organization, particularly the part of the organization that's focused on a territory, when the competition is that tight? And how does that change then from a place where you've got an easier time of things? What have you noticed in the way that maybe the unexpected ways that people behave, or the way that the organization behaves and treats the tight race?
A tight race means you need to be more knowledgeable of how you place your resources. Tighter margins. I think financial expectations don't necessarily go down, but you have to have more mindful on where you allocate resources, because you're fighting every step of the way. In the case where you have larger market shares, you're more open to take more risks and make larger investments and try new things. So I do think that it's a way of how you look at risk and how you look at your allocation of resources. That's something that comes from that competitive level. And in some cases, the corporation might decide to place a financial bet, and then the way you manage your resources changes, but then you get more freedom in terms of financial results to get that drive. So it's a portfolio at the end for somebody that's overseeing the globe or overseeing international markets on how you place your bets, who's going to take more risk, who are you planning to ask for more growth or for more profit, and what are you going to allocate some of that profit back into each one of the marketplaces. So it is a difference on how you manage those aspects of budget allocation and objective setting.
That's interesting. What do you think that does for innovation for the organization? Is most folks I think would probably be used to hearing that competition is what makes innovation. But that doesn't sound like what you're saying. It sounds more like the innovation might happen when you have a clearer space in front of you and you can have room to try new things.
I do think that's the beauty of having a portfolio of countries and regions, because if you look at it from a global perspective, there's some places where you're willing to take additional risk and place more innovation bets because either you have more power with the retailer or you have more means to get your content and your message out. So that's why a portfolio makes a lot of sense. And at the same time, you can test things. There's a big change, I believe, in the way you look at strategy, and you need to go faster and quicker. And that forces you to make more agile decisions than waterfall decisions, that you're trying to get all the information in rather than just going out and execute. So I think it's whoever's concentrated has more issues, because then you cannot allocate bets or investments on the different marketplaces.
Now, we've been going through some really strange years, I think, in the world. I think when we talk to our attendees and our speakers, there's a sense that there's been a major cultural shift somewhere recently, and various people put it at the election of Modi, or more recently with Brexit or something like that. But there seems to be feeling like there's something new in the air in business and strategy. What do you think that this means for leaders and how they should be thinking about the world right now? I mean, everything is up in the air, right? We've got trade, we've got newly, much more empowered local competitors in these markets. Well outside of consumer goods, it's everywhere, right? People are able to compete, and companies are able to compete in ways that are, I think, giving a lot of companies some serious anxiety. So how do you think about that? What's the frame of mind you should have?
I think the discussion around politics, economics, and social implications is getting back to the C-suite, which hadn't been there for a longer period of time, obviously depending on the industry. But I do believe that I have experience in Latin America, right? So we needed to have discussions with the leadership teams around what's going to happen with the currency, what's going to happen with the elections, how that might shift policy. While in developed countries, it was a lesser of a discussion before 2008, and even before 2000, and it was much lesser of a discussion because there was a certain track. It was certain aspects of things that you thought that were given, right? And I do think that getting more engagement from the C-suite on things like policy and economics and politics and social implications as factors that can be much more disruptive than in the past. It's the turning point of what we're seeing in that front. but also what I think more and more, leadership needs to be doing, because it will have an impact, and you need to have not only contingency plans, but engagement strategies at very level, at levels, at local level, with local politicians, with through trade institutions, trade associations, and that has to be much more proactive. So I do think that this is becoming higher and higher in the priorities of many boards around Western developed countries.
Now, when you look at the current trade situation, the way that, NAFTA was sort of put into question for a while, seems like that's getting sorted out. We have the USMCA, which I guess we'll be getting a new text to look at soon enough. They're still ironing out details, and we'll find out more about that at Get Global. But there's China, there's all kinds of, stuff to keep people awake at night. How would you be thinking about the trade landscape right now, and what all of this means with tariffs and the prospect of trade war and the supply chain issues and just the whole gamut that it touches?
Well, there's you referenced NAFTA and the new agreements. Just the fact that you're getting some of e-retail elements into that new agreement is going to change a bit the way local organizations are structured. I do think that all of this needs to be discussed, and understanding that you will require flexible structures. You will require a culture that adapts quickly to change, and you need to understand what ties you into a specific geography, and how can you gain degrees of freedom of being tied to that specific geography. How do you manufacturing? How flexible are you on managing your manufacturing and your supply chain around the world? What market implications and pricing implications and of cross-border shipping might have and imply? I think those are all elements that are going to be extremely important on setting up strategy and structure in the future.
So how would you be looking at what's going on right now with China then, in particular?
I do think that for the toy industry is one of the first industries that having this global footprint and having that commonality among its consumers, it moved into bigger production runs. And I do believe that the toy industry needs to understand how flexible production is going to be, and also what access to the local market you're going to have, and how much freedom out of content you can get. Those are all questions that I think are good to have discussions on, and not only plan for scenario one, but having 2, 3, 4, 5 scenarios to really understand if A happens, how can you act? If B happens, how can you act? I do believe that a lot of the supply chain is connected to China. So I really hope that we find common ground on both what market access means and how not to disrupt the supply chain, which has kept inflation up so many places in the world for the past 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to definitely be talking a lot more about that. Anything else you want to add before we part?
Well, I do think that I'm going to be sharing some more ideas at the summit. And I do want to, let people know that it's good to be paranoid. And I want you to be good paranoid, not bad paranoid. But you need to be very clear on how you're looking at your consumer, with which frequency, how you're looking at your industry and the forces of the industry, how you're looking at competition. I do believe that you need to understand which sources of disruption you have in front of you and which opportunities you can go out and grab, understand your own resources, and that has to be a much quicker and faster review, because you're going to have to change that mentality that strategic plans are for 3 to 5 years. You need to have a much agile mentality and go after ready, fire, aim, and really try new things. And you have to move fast. And it's fine to feel insecure. You will feel insecure. Just move from knowing one medium to another, and it's so quick, the changes that are happening on every front, that you just need to embrace that insecurity and know that you need to be flexible in structure, but do have a culture that stands time and that stands, the real trials and tribulations of this time. And that culture, it's structure at any time, for breakfast. I think that this is something that, who's in business needs to understand. Some industries are being more disrupted than others, but somehow you need to be checking on those factors of disruption, making sure that you're acting upon them and acting fast, being flexible on your resources and structure, but having a culture that really moves and approves of being fast and nimble. And I think that's kind of my latest learnings on business.
I think that is excellent advice for this day and age, for sure. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for making time, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to find out more about our events and get more global intel every week, sign up for our newsletter at getglobal.co.